Remember those bedtime stories from your childhood? Tales of brave princes, beautiful princesses, and talking animals. All warm and fuzzy, right? But what if I told you that beneath that sweet facade lie real thrillers and dark social commentaries? Today, we're going behind the scenes of these beloved children's tales to uncover 20 hidden meanings that will genuinely creep you out. Get ready, because after this video, you'll never look at the gingerbread man the same way again. To kick things off, let's unravel where these stories actually originated. Initially, fairy tales weren't for kids at all. They were oral narratives intended for adults, a kind of medieval folk stand-up. They served as cautionary tales reflecting the harsh realities of life: famine, disease, war, and brutal customs. The Brothers Grimm, whom we often think of as kindly storytellers, were actually linguists and meticulous collectors of folklore. They simply documented popular tales without much embellishment. It was only much later, century after century, that these narratives were adapted for younger audiences, with the most gruesome details edited out. But the original darker meanings lingered, and now we're going to dig them up. So let's start with a story everyone knows: Little Red Riding Hood. On the surface, it's a sweet tale about a girl carrying pies to her sick grandmother. But in reality, it's one of the darkest and most straightforward cautionary tales. Let's break it down. Why is the cloak red? This colour is no accident. In European culture of that era, red symbolised sin, passion, and awakening female sexuality. The girl is coming of age, and this vibrant colour makes her noticeable, marking her as potential prey. The wolf himself, of course, isn't just a forest animal. He's an allegory for a predatory man, a seducer. Notice, he doesn't attack immediately. He talks to her, he's charming, he pries for information. His famous questions when he's already in the grandmother's bed: "Why do you have such big ears? And why such big eyes?" are a classic abuser's tactic, gradually closing the distance and lulling the victim into a false sense of security. In the earliest version of the tale, recorded by Charles Perrault, there's no woodcutter at all. The wolf eats the grandmother, and then Little Red Riding Hood herself. The end. The moral was crystal clear. Young girls shouldn't talk to strangers, or the consequences would be fatal. It's a brutal lesson, not a children's story. Let's talk about Cinderella. We're used to the Disney version with a kind fairy godmother and a sparkling glass slipper. But in the Brothers Grimm's variant, this fairy tale transforms into a genuine thriller of envy and self-mutilation. So when the prince arrives with the slipper, it doesn't fit either of the stepsisters. And what does their mother do? She hands her eldest daughter a knife and says, "Cut off your toe. When you're queen, you won't have to walk anyway." The girl obeys, hacks off her toe, forces on the slipper, and rides off with the prince. But on the way, pigeons perched in a tree sing to the prince that the slipper is soaked in blood. The deception is exposed. The prince returns, and now it's the second sister's turn. The slipper is too small for her as well. Their mother again hands her a knife, this time advising her to cut off a piece of her heel. And again, after deceiving the prince, she rides towards the palace, and again the birds expose her. But that's not all. The tale's ending is pure vengeance. At Cinderella's wedding, those very same pigeons fly down and peck out the sisters' eyes, one eye each on the way to the church and the second on the way back. In the end, they remain blind beggars for the rest of their lives. No forgiveness, just brutal retribution. What about Sleeping Beauty? The familiar tale of a magical kiss that breaks a century-long curse. That's the classic version we all know. However, in its original form, the Italian tale, Sun, Moon, and Talia, things were far, far darker. Instead of a charming prince, the sleeping maiden is discovered by a married king who is merely hunting in the forest. Captivated by her beauty, he makes no attempt to kiss or awaken her. Instead, he brutally assaults her, leaves her still sleeping in the castle, and returns to his own kingdom. 9 months later, still in her enchanted slumber, she gives birth to twins. But her awakening isn't triggered by a kiss. She finally stirs awake when one of her infants, searching for nourishment, accidentally sucks her finger, drawing out the poisoned splinter from the spindle. Imagine her shock to awaken from a century-long sleep and discover two babies lying beside her. But that's just the beginning of her nightmare. The king's jealous wife soon learns of the princess and her children. She orders the royal cook to kill the infants, prepare them as a meal, and serve them to the king for dinner. The princess herself she intends to burn at the stake. Ultimately, the king uncovers the plot, burns his wicked wife, and marries the princess. But let's be honest, a story involving assault, attempted cannibalism, and murder is hardly the bedtime fairy tale you'd want to share. Next, we delve into the story of Hansel and Gretel, two lost children who stumble upon a house made of gingerbread and sweets deep in the forest. We were taught it was a tale of cleverness and the importance of sticking together to overcome evil. But the real story behind it is far more terrifying than any witch. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's a stark reflection of the Great Famine that gripped Europe in the 14th century. This was a period of catastrophic crop failures when people died by the thousands. Desperation reached such a point that adults were forced to make monstrous decisions just to survive. Abandoning children in the forest to certain death was one such horrific choice. So the father leading Hansel and Gretel into the woods isn't a fairy tale villain. He's a representation of a desperate man of his time. And the witch and her gingerbread house, they're not mere figments of imagination. They're powerful metaphors. The gingerbread house is a symbol of false hope, a tempting lure. In times of extreme hunger, any food seemed like salvation. And the witch fattening up children to eat them is an allegory for cannibalism, which according to historians truly occurred during the darkest years of the famine. The children, in turn, to survive, must resort to extreme cruelty and burn the witch in her own oven. This is a tale of survival in a world where there's no room for compassion, only hunger and death. Now, let's delve deep beneath the waves into the original tale of The Little Mermaid. Disney's version gave us the familiar red-haired Ariel singing her heart out, who eventually gets both her legs and her prince. But Christian Andersen's original fairy tale is a stark tragedy, brimming with both physical and emotional agony. First off, the price for her legs was far steeper than just her voice. The sea witch explicitly warned her that every single step on land would feel as though she were treading on sharp, excruciating knife blades. Every moment on solid ground was an agonizing torture. She danced for the prince, smiling through the unbearable pain as her feet bled with every step, a secret agony hidden from all. Secondly, the prince himself. He never truly loved her back. He saw her more as a charming, exotic curiosity, almost a pet. He even affectionately called her his foundling, allowing her to sleep on a cushion at his feet. He ultimately married a human princess, mistakenly believing she was the one who had saved him. And finally, the devastating conclusion. Her sisters, in a desperate attempt, traded their own beautiful hair to the sea witch for a magical dagger and brought it to her. To save her own life and return to her mermaid form, she had to plunge the dagger into the prince's heart and let his blood wash over her feet. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she cast the dagger into the ocean, and as dawn broke, she threw herself into the waves, her body dissolving into mere sea foam. No happily ever after in sight, only self-sacrifice, unrequited love, and everlasting heartbreak remained. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. At first glance, it seems like a classic tale of good versus evil, but delve deeper. And what unfolds is a dark psychological drama exploring themes of female envy, narcissism, and the pervasive fear of aging. The primary antagonist here is the stepmother queen. Her obsession with the question, who is the fairest of them all, isn't mere fairy tale vanity. It's a clear manifestation of extreme narcissistic personality disorder. Her entire self-worth hinges on external validation of her beauty, and when the mirror names her stepdaughter, her world shatters. Snow White isn't just a rival, she's a living, breathing reminder of the Queen's fading youth. The Queen's response isn't merely banishment, but total annihilation. Initially, she commands the huntsman to kill the girl, and bring back her lungs and liver as proof. These are gruesome details from the Brothers Grimm version, often omitted in modern adaptations. Some interpretations even suggest she intended to consume them, symbolically devouring Snow White's youth and beauty. Her 3 murder attempts, the suffocating stays, the poisoned comb, and finally, the infamous apple, underscore her maniacal obsession. And the dwarves? Far from being mere saviours, they symbolise a patriarchal society willing to shelter a beautiful woman, but only if she embraces the role of a domestic servant. She cooks, cleans, and sews while they toil. This isn't merely a fairy tale about magic. It's a chilling narrative about the destructive power of envy and rigid social roles. Let's delve into something less obvious now. Goldilocks and the 3 bears. As children, we often perceive this fairy tale as a charming story about an overly curious girl who simply wandered into the wrong house. But its original form was a grim parable about the severe consequences of violating boundaries. Rather than a sweet little girl, the protagonist in the earliest versions was a cunning and ugly old woman. She deliberately invaded the bears' home to feast on their food and enjoy their comforts. This was a tale of brazen theft and impudence, not innocent curiosity. Upon returning home and discovering the mess, the bears were not simply surprised, but enraged owners. Their famous lines, "Who's been sitting in my chair? Who's been eating from my bowl?" weren't just questions, but expressions of escalating rage. And the conclusion was anything but benign. Some versions depict the bears simply devouring the audacious old woman. Others had them tossing her out the window, resulting in a broken neck. Even in the mildest version, she merely fled into the woods, but the core message persisted: an invasion of someone else's space. Their home would not go unpunished. This tale taught not about curiosity, but about instilling a fierce respect for private property and personal boundaries, often in the harshest possible way. Rumpelstiltskin, the classic tale of a malicious little dwarf who can spin gold from straw. But strip away the magic and what you're left with is a chillingly realistic story of debt bondage and blackmail. Picture this: a young maiden, the miller's daughter, is locked in a room full of straw and threatened with execution if she can't spin it into gold. This is no mere fairy tale trial. It's a situation of extreme desperation and utter hopelessness. And then a saviour emerges, Rumpelstiltskin. But his assistance comes at a price. First, he takes her necklace, then her ring. It mirrors a predatory lender, who first demands small tokens, and when the girl has nothing left to give, he demands the most precious thing she will ever possess in the future, her firstborn child. It's a contract signed in a moment of desperation, with monstrous terms. When the queen cannot pay him back, he doesn't forgive the debt. He comes for what's truly his, and the only way to escape isn't through strength or wealth, but by knowing his name, essentially gaining power over him. This tale serves as a dark warning that desperate bargains come at a terrible price, and that debts, especially those incurred with mysterious forces, can destroy your life. As for Rumpelstiltskin himself, in the end, he tears himself apart in a fit of rage. A cruel end for a cruel creditor. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is actually far from being a simple fairy tale. Many believe it's a folkloric reflection of a genuine historical tragedy. The familiar tale goes like this. The town of Hamelin hires a piper to rid them of rats. He succeeds, but the town council refuses to pay. In retaliation, the piper, with his magical flute, leads all the children out of the town. It sounds like a grim legend, but historians believe real events may lie behind it. Several theories exist. The first, and perhaps most sombre, theory suggests an epidemic. Rats are notorious carriers of the plague. It's possible the piper symbolises the Black Death itself, leading the children away by simply causing them to perish from the illness. In this interpretation, the magical flute represents inescapable doom. The second theory posits recruitment. Some scholars connect the legend to the so-called Children's Crusades. During the Middle Ages, fanatical preachers sometimes mesmerised thousands of children and teenagers with their rhetoric, leading them on journeys to the Holy Land. Most of these children perished along the way, or were sold into slavery. The piper, with his flute, could embody such a charismatic recruiter. The third theory suggests mass emigration. It's plausible that, driven by poverty and famine, a large group of young people left Hamelin in search of a better life, perhaps to colonize lands to the east. Over time, in the collective memory, this significant exodus could have transformed into the mysterious disappearance we know today. Regardless of the true explanation, this isn't just a tale of magic but a poignant narrative about the very real loss of an entire generation of children. Beauty and the Beast. We typically view this story as a timeless tale praising inner beauty and triumphant love. However, from a psychological perspective, it presents as a classic case of Stockholm Syndrome. Let's break it down. Belle, the protagonist, becomes a prisoner in the castle. The Beast is her captor. He holds her against her will, controlling every aspect of her life. Naturally, she initially fears and despises him, but over time, in complete isolation, she begins to perceive positive qualities in her captor. He isn't so bad. He gives her a library. He can even be kind. This is precisely what Stockholm Syndrome is, a psychological phenomenon where a hostage develops sympathy and even affection for their aggressor. It's a psychological defense mechanism, an attempt to survive unbearable circumstances. Furthermore, the fairy tale also reflects the social realities of its era, particularly arranged marriages. Young women were frequently married off without their consent to wealthy, influential men who were sometimes old, unattractive, or even cruel. The Beast serves as a metaphor for such an unwelcome, yet financially advantageous, suitor for the family. In essence, the story taught young women to resign themselves to their fate and to seek inner beauty in their beast, effectively, to adapt and learn to love the person they were compelled to spend their entire lives with. Ultimately, this tale isn't just about love. It's a stark commentary on survival and adaptation within a ruthless patriarchal world. Jack and the Beanstalk. As children, we were captivated by the thrilling tale of a resourceful boy who outsmarted and defeated an evil giant. But what if we examine Jack's actions through a different lens, that of morality and the law? Jack is, in essence, a juvenile offender. He unlawfully enters another's home, a clear case of breaking and entering. He then proceeds to steal the giant's valuable possessions, a sack of gold, a hen that lays golden eggs, and a magical harp. This isn't petty theft. It's grand larceny. And what does he do in the end? When the giant attempts to reclaim his stolen property, Jack chops down the beanstalk, causing the giant to fall to his death. That's murder. Despite all this, the fairy tale paints Jack as a hero. His actions are not condemned. Instead, they lead him and his mother to riches and a happy life. The underlying message seems to be, the end justifies the means. If you're poor and someone else is rich, especially if they're big and scary, then it's not just acceptable, but perhaps even necessary to rob and kill them. This is a profoundly problematic message. The fairy tale glorifies theft, deception, and even murder, particularly when committed by the little guy against the big guy. Essentially, it's an alarming justification for crime, framed as a response to social inequality. The giant, of course, is portrayed as a villain. Yet, when you strip away the narrative, he is merely a victim of home invasion and robbery, who was simply defending his property. And Jack, he's a lucky thief and a cold-blooded killer, yet we're encouraged to see him as the hero. Let's talk about a beloved classic from our own folklore, The Frog Princess. We often remember it as a story about how appearances can be deceiving, and that a beautiful soul might be hidden behind an unassuming exterior. However, one of the most crucial lessons, which we often overlook, is the story of a broken promise and the dire consequences of impatience. Remember, Prince Ivan marries the frog, only to soon discover that at night she transforms into the stunning Vasilisa the Wise. She simply asks him to wait a little longer, to be patient for just 3 days. During this brief period, her enchantment will lift, and she will remain human permanently. This is the crucial condition for their lasting happiness together. But what does Ivan do? He simply cannot wait. Impatience and perhaps a touch of shame for his seemingly unpresentable wife drives his actions. He finds her discarded frog skin and impulsively throws it into the oven, burning it. He believes that by doing so, he can somehow speed up the process, forcing her to remain in her beautiful human forms. But in truth, he utterly ruins everything. He defies the rules of the magical world, breaking his unspoken vow of patience. His impulsive act doesn't save his wife. Instead, it condemns her to a far more terrifying captivity under the villainous Koshchei the Immortal, and himself to a long and perilous quest to undo his grave error. This offers a powerful lesson. Impatience and the desire to have everything immediately can lead to catastrophe and destroy the very things you cherish. Peter Pan, the boy who never wanted to grow up. Sounds like a dream, doesn't it? Endless games soaring through the sky, and thrilling adventures in the magical world of Neverland. But upon closer inspection, this tale is far deeper and more melancholic than it first appears. Neverland isn't merely an island of imagination. According to one popular, rather grim theory, it serves as a metaphor for a paradise for deceased children. Peter Pan himself is an angelic guide, ushering the souls of these children into the afterlife. This is why they never age. They simply cannot. The Lost Boys, in this interpretation, are children who fell out of their prams, a poetic way of saying they died in infancy and were left unattended. Wendy and her brothers are the exception, as Peter took them while they slept, positioning them on the threshold between worlds. Ultimately, they return to their world because they wake up, a symbolic awakening. Peter Pan himself is a truly tragic character. He envies ordinary children who have mothers and the ability to grow up. His eternal childhood is not a gift, but a curse. He is condemned to an eternity of play, to constantly forget his friends as they leave and mature, and to remain perpetually alone. This is not a story about the carefree joy of childhood, but a sobering tale about the fear of growing up, about loneliness, and perhaps about confronting the frighteningly high rates of child mortality in the Victorian era. The Adventures of Pinocchio. In our minds, this usually conjures images of the sweet wooden Disney boy whose nose grows when he lies. But Carlo Collodi's original book? That's an entirely different story. It's far darker, grittier, and more didactic. Collodi wasn't writing a gentle fable for tender young minds. It was a sharp satire on society and a harsh tale about education through suffering. The Pinocchio in the book isn't merely naive. He's selfish, lazy, and utterly ungrateful. He immediately runs away from his creator, Geppetto, and directly causes the old man to be thrown into prison. The adventures of Pinocchio are filled with violence and cruelty. The talking cricket, who attempts to offer him wise counsel, isn't just ignored. In a fit of rage, Pinocchio hurls a wooden mallet at him, killing him on the spot. Yes, in the book, he literally murders his conscience. But perhaps the most shocking revelation is the original ending. Collodi never intended for Pinocchio to become a real boy at all. His story was meant to conclude in chapter 15. The two rogues, the cat and the fox, catch Pinocchio, rob him of his coins, and hang him from an oak tree. The author writes, he felt his breath failing him, and he could utter not another word. He closed his eyes, opened his mouth, stretched out his legs, and, with a violent shudder, became stiff. That was meant to be the end of Pinocchio. It was only at the insistence of the magazine editor, where the serial was being published, that Collodi penned a continuation, featuring his rescue and eventual transformation into a human boy. Bluebeard's story is, without a doubt, a quintessential medieval horror thriller, cleverly disguised as a children's tale. Far from being a simple fairy tale, it's a true proto-slasher, specifically designed to instill terror in its young female audience. Bluebeard, the protagonist, is a wealthy aristocrat with an unsettling appearance. He takes a young woman as his bride, granting her access to his entire castle, but with one crucial condition: she must never enter a small, forbidden chamber in the basement. This is a classic forbidden fruit motif, skillfully playing on human curiosity. Inevitably, her curiosity gets the better of her. She opens the door and is met with a horrific sight. A chamber drenched in blood, its walls adorned with the gruesome remains of Bluebeard's former wives. He is unequivocally a serial killer. The key, now indelibly stained with blood, serves as irrefutable proof of her transgression. Upon Bluebeard's return, he discovers the blood-stained key and without hesitation, mercilessly informs his wife that she is now destined for the same gruesome end. Her brothers, however, arrive in the nick of time, storming the castle and slaying the madman, saving her from certain death at the very last moment. On the surface, the tale's moral seems to warn against unchecked female curiosity, but beneath that, it's a chilling and profound warning that behind a facade of wealth and power, monstrous danger can lurk, and that marriage to a stranger can be a deadly trap. Ultimately, it's a stark portrayal of domestic violence and tyranny, amplified to absolute horror. The Three Little Pigs. From childhood, this fable seems like a simple, clear lesson. Be diligent and prepared, like the third pig, and then no wolf can harm you. The straw and stick houses represent idleness, the brick house, industry, but beneath this seemingly straightforward moral lies a much darker, more pragmatic philosophy. Essentially, this tale is a microcosm of social Darwinism. It's not just the most hard-working who survives, but the most prepared, the one with resources. Building a brick house costs significantly more and takes longer than a straw hut. This suggests the third pig was either the most intelligent or the most well-off to begin with. And what about the fate of his brothers? In most modern adaptations, they simply escape and hide in the brick house. However, the original English folk tale presents a much more brutal reality. The wolf blows down the straw house and devours the first pig. He then destroys the stick house and eats the second. There is no escape. In the climax, the third pig doesn't just hide from the wolf. When the wolf tries to enter the house via the chimney, the pig places a cauldron of boiling water over the fire. The wolf tumbles straight in, and the clever pig quickly puts the lid on, boils the wolf, and eats him for dinner. This story isn't about fraternal cooperation, but about the merciless survival of the strongest, who ultimately not only saves himself, but quite literally feasts on the remains of his enemy. Rapunzel, a girl with impossibly long hair, imprisoned in a tall, doorless tower. A story often perceived as one of love that conquers all obstacles. But beneath the surface, it's a strikingly accurate metaphor for overprotective parenting and the destructive consequences of parental control. Mother Gothel, the witch, isn't just a villain. She embodies the toxic parent who, under the guise of protection and love, completely isolates their child from the outside world. The doorless tower is a symbol of absolute control, a prison built from care. Gothel convinces Rapunzel that the world outside is dangerous and cruel, and that only she can keep her safe. This is classic manipulation, designed to keep a child tethered to them forever. The arrival of the prince marks Rapunzel's first attempt to separate and forge her own life. And what is the loving mother's reaction? Fury. She refuses to let her daughter go. She cuts off Rapunzel's beautiful hair, a symbol of her femininity and connection to the outside world, and banishes her to a desolate wilderness where she is forced to wander in destitution. The prince, too, is cruelly harmed, blinded by Gothel. This is a story about how suffocating parental love, which denies a child the right to their own life, ultimately leads to tragedy. The fairy tale illustrates that trying to shield a child from all the world's dangers by locking them away in a tower isn't care at all. Instead, it's an act of selfishness that cripples both the child and their future. The Ugly Duckling. It's one of Christian Andersen's most touching and hopeful tales. It teaches us not to despair if we feel different, because eventually we'll find our true place and flourish. However, beneath this positive surface lies a rather stark, even aristocratic subtext. Let's consider what actually unfolds in the story. The duckling suffers not because of any inherent flaw, but because he was born into the wrong environment. He's a swan, mistakenly raised among ducks. All his humiliations and suffering don't end through his own efforts, hard work, or kindness, they cease simply because he finally encounters his true kin, other magnificent swans. The story isn't about an ugly duck transforming into a beautiful duck. Instead, it suggests that if you are born a swan, you are inherently beautiful by birthright, even if you temporarily find yourself in squalid surroundings. But if you're born a duck, well, you'll remain just a duck. In this sense, the tale reflects themes of innate nobility and inherent class inequality. Your worth is predetermined by your lineage. Your blue blood will always reveal itself. This isn't a story of social mobility where anyone can rise through effort. Instead, it's about the importance of finding your rightful place among your equals by birth. The moral, therefore, is rather snobbish. True happiness and recognition are only attainable within the circle of your own kind. Hans Christian Andersen's The Princess and the Pea is often seen as a charming, if somewhat whimsical, children's story. The plot is simple. A prince seeks a true princess, and his mother devises a peculiar test. She places a single pea beneath 20 mattresses and 20 feather beds. Only the girl who can feel it is deemed worthy of the title, the true princess. Most of us grew up believing this tale champions incredible sensitivity and aristocratic refinement. However, a closer look reveals it to be a biting satire on aristocracy and its inherent snobbery. Andersen, himself from humble beginnings, frequently used his stories to lampoon the upper echelons of society. Consider this. What kind of quality is it to feel a single pea through 40 layers of bedding? This isn't true sensitivity, it's outright absurdity. It's an extreme illustration of pamperedness and an almost debilitating delicacy. The story brilliantly exposes how the elite fabricate utterly ludicrous and meaningless criteria of nobility, simply to distinguish themselves from common folk. A true princess, by this logic, isn't defined by intelligence, kindness, or character, but by her capacity to feel discomfort from the most trivial inconvenience. It's a stark caricature of aristocrats so utterly detached from reality that the slightest discomfort is perceived as a profound tragedy. The tale's conclusion, where the pea is enshrined in a museum as an extraordinary curiosity, further sharpens this irony. The entire royal court marvels not at the princess herself, but at the absurd proof of her so-called blue blood. Far from being a hymn to delicacy, it's a scathing indictment of elitism and the preposterous lengths people go to prove their supposed exclusivity. And finally, Kolobok, that cheerful, rosy-cheeked fellow who runs away from his grandparents singing his catchy little tune. As children, we often see it as a simple tale of wit and bravado, but viewed through the lens of life's journey, it transforms into one of the most tragic and cautionary stories about adolescent rebellion and its profound consequences. Kolobok, in essence, represents a child freshly baked into existence. His grandparents act as his primary guardians. He's placed on the windowsill to cool down, a metaphor for being under watchful care. But suddenly he decides he's grown up and entirely independent. He rolls away, abandoning the safety of home. His journey mirrors the classic trajectory of a teenager convinced they're smarter than anyone. He encounters the hare, the wolf, and the bear, symbolic of various social dangers. He outwits them with ease, and his self-assurance swells with every perceived triumph. His catchy tune, "I ran away from Grandpa, I ran away from Grandma," becomes an anthem of youthful maximalism and a defiant rejection of authority. He truly believes he's invincible. But then, he encounters the fox. The fox isn't just another animal he can outrun. She embodies cunning, flattery, and deception, forces that cannot be overcome by simple cheekiness. She doesn't resort to threats or brute force. Instead, she flatters him, playing directly into his vanity. "Sit on my nose, sing it just one more time," and the overly confident Kolobok falls right into her trap. The fox devours him. The end. It's a harsh yet incredibly realistic ending. Running away from home and an inflated belief in one's own invulnerability often lead to tragic consequences when faced with the real, treacherous world. But the most shocking twists are often found in the details that have been conveniently forgotten over time. Take Sleeping Beauty, for instance. In the version by Italian storyteller Giambattista Basile, which actually formed the basis of the story we know today, a king discovers the sleeping princess, but instead of a kiss, he assaults her. He then leaves, and she, still deep in slumber, gives birth to twins. Her awakening isn't from a magical kiss, but from one of her infants searching for nourishment, sucking a splinter from the spindle out of her finger. Imagine that, waking up after years only to find you have 2 children, with absolutely no idea how they got there. Talk about a plot twist, right? Or take Hansel and Gretel. This story might seem like a mere scary fable, but it's rooted in a very real historical event, the Great Famine of 1315 and 1317 in Europe. That era was marked by horrific devastation, where cannibalism and child abandonment weren't fictional concepts, but a terrifying reality for many families desperate to survive. The witch's gingerbread house isn't just a fantasy element, it's a chilling metaphor for false hope and a final, deadly trap for the desperate. And what about the tragedy of Andersen's Little Mermaid? We're all familiar with Disney's Happily Ever After, but in the original, her story is a stark anthem to selfless sacrifice with no reward. She endures excruciating pain with every step. Her prince sees her as little more than a sweet, wild child and marries an earthly princess. She's given a choice: kill the prince and save herself, or die. She chooses the latter and dissolves into sea foam. No wedding, no happily ever after. Just pain, loss, and a quiet, tragic demise. So, what's the takeaway here? Fairy tales aren't just fanciful stories meant for entertainment. They are cultural codes, encrypted messages from the past. They're like time capsules preserving the fears, hopes, and often brutal customs of our ancestors. And by reading them today, we're not just exploring magical worlds, we're connecting with a very ancient, and at times, very dark chapter of human history. Thank you for watching this video to the very end. If you found unravelling these hidden meanings as fascinating as I did, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more equally compelling analyses. Now, a question for you. Which fairy tale from your childhood do you now find the most unsettling? Or perhaps you know of other hidden meanings I didn't mention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's discuss.